Welcome to Unposted, a series on my YouTube channel that takes on topics which I think are too thoughtful, too layered, or simply too real to survive the LinkedIn algorithm. This is a conversation space for coaches and leaders to engage in smart, spicy discourse that prioritizes lived experience and informed takes with zero tolerance for cheap shots. I'm Mariana, a first generation professional, leadership coach, and former talent development executive who supports 21st century leaders navigating complex career environments. My guest today is Amanda Lee. Amanda has been a trial attorney for over 20 years and is a certified professional coach who has spent her career in and out of the courtroom advocating for women and children. A survivor of domestic violence, she founded the Lee Consultants to provide strategic, trauma informed services for high achieving professionals experiencing domestic abuse, including tailored coaching and executive level training to raise organizational awareness and increase support. Amanda, it is amazing to have you here. Thank you so much for making the time.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here and to talk with you.
So, I asked you to join me on Unposted for Women's History Month to talk about the incredibly courageous and important mission you've launched to provide support for professional women experiencing domestic violence. So, I'd like to start by learning a little bit more about your background and how you came to be an advocate in this space.
Yeah, thank you. So I started my career as an attorney back in 2005. I started off as a prosecutor. I specialized in sex crimes and child abuse. I went on to go into civil defense. I represented a large multi-billion-dollar organization on one of the biggest school systems in the nation. I then moved on to the federal government. That spans the 20-year career I had. I still am in. But the first 13 years of that career, I was also enduring domestic violence. And I was excelling in my career throughout. I was achieving all the different levels. I was very active in the community. To your point about the advocating for women and children, I was serving on nonprofit boards. I was constantly in different organizations, helping women, helping children, putting people in jail for committing crimes against women and children. But yet I was secretly enduring domestic violence. Nobody knew, not coworkers, not friends, not family. And so I hid that for, again, 13 years of my career. I finally got out in 2017. Career continued to go, continued to be successful. And I still did not tell anyone. But finally, I started talking couple years ago, and I started to meet other attorneys, and we would start saying little things to each other that made me realize, wait a second, did we experience the same thing? And the more and more I talked, the more I was learning that there are a lot of us out there that experience domestic violence while we are excelling in our careers, and we are doing these things that are respected and that are, rewarding. But yet we are hiding this secret. So finally, I say that I've had enough of all of us being silent. We're all so scared of what this is going to do to our reputation and what people are going to think about us. We can't do this anymore. And that's when I decided I am going to launch the Lee Consultants and start tackling this head on. So I do still practice law separately, but at the Lee Consultants, all of my services are geared towards high achieving professionals, both the executive level training to really raise awareness and also direct coaching to help individuals, someone that I would have needed 8 or 9 years ago and the first 13 years of my career. That's what I'm now doing.
What an incredible story. And I'm sure you hear this a lot. It's so inspiring to see how you have been so courageous and brave in stepping into your power and elevating this incredibly important topic into the hearts and minds and consciousness of people that, probably think women who like you who are, highly educated and have prestigious careers, like this would never touch them or their reality. And you are living proof that that couldn't be further from the truth. So, full disclosure for anyone watching, Amanda and I met when we were both in the same program to become certified in trauma informed coaching. And since then, we've kept in touch. And recently, we were talking, and you're about to embark on a number of speaking engagements around this idea of it happens to us too. which is so powerful. Can you explain a little bit more about that?
It's really just about raising awareness. And what I need to do to raise that is to reach the people that it happens to and those that are around the people that it happens to, but not only that it happens to, but that it's not acknowledged. And so what I'm really doing is going out to where there are executives, where we have leaders, attorneys and any other type of group that's out there, whether it just be professional groups, and talking to them and saying, there's a lot of misunderstandings about domestic violence. And one of the biggest ones is that it happens to them and not us. And then I talk about that. I talk about what it really is, what it's like, why a lot of us feel silenced when we are in this professional position, and what people can do to support their colleagues. I also talk about the professional responsibility that we have to really focus on this issue because wellness is such a big thing in the professional world and how that impacts our work, that this is something that impacts us too. So if we're going to talk about wellness and how important that is to professionals, we need to recognize something that impacts so many of us and impacts our wellness and our well-being, that we just can't be silent about it anymore.
As you start to move through this space as an expert, both in lived experience and in skill set, what is surprising you? What are some things that you're learning that have even kind of fed your lens of understanding further?
Well, first thing that I guess surprise is probably the right word. I think it's really affirmation as well. But every time I speak, every time I post something, like a new article, I have somebody reach out to me. I have them come up to me. I have them privately message me and say, that happened to me, but nobody knows. I can't tell anyone thank you. And it's just that, again, that confirmation that it truly is happening everywhere. It wasn't just those people I was talking to when I decided to launch this business. It really is happening everywhere. The most surprising thing, though, is when I had a man come up to me recently and he said, thank you for sharing that this happens to people that, society doesn't talk about. He says, I know you focus a lot on professionals, but you also talk about how it can happen to men or it can happen to, any people in different relationships, whether it's a, homosexual, heterosexual relationship, it doesn't matter. And he said, thank you. He said, because I'm a man and nobody would believe that it happened to me. So that was probably one of the times that it really reminded me, okay, yes, I have this focus on professionals and getting that out, but I also have to constantly foot stomp. It's can happen to anyone. And I do talk about that it can happen to men and it can happen to, any demographic, but that was really important when that happened. And I will say the final thing that's just been, again, surprising possibly, but just really, a really great thing that I've been experiencing when I'm talking is the feedback. The people who have never experienced this and who have never even thought of this, they usually are a little bit, apprehensive at first, like, why do I need to hear this? But then I have gotten so many people that say, wow, I would have never known that. I did not think that this was even an issue. And now they're aware. And now they're like, what can I do? And what more? And they want to take action. So that's been just really, really rewarding. And it's also just been something that says, okay, yeah, this is a problem. And people are willing to tackle it, but they need someone to help them.
There's already so much pressure around optics
Mhm.
for females in professional roles. And when you couple that with things that are happening privately behind the scenes that are incredibly traumatic, I can imagine it just must be so much shame that's being added on top of everything else. What's your take on that? And what are you learning about it? And how are you getting organizations to kind of come to the light on this? Because traditionally, it's something that they wouldn't have touched with a 20-foot pole.
Right, right. And that is still an issue. I am still having difficulty. I do have a couple speaking engagements, but I'm still trying to reach out to places and say, you need this. This is part of you. You care about wellness. You care about your employees. You need to care about this too, because this is affecting people. The CDC actually recently, I think I just posted something about it today on LinkedIn. So I don't know exactly the day, but it was recently came out and said, yes, the number now is 1 in 3. It used to be 1 in 4 women. It is, and it's more than 1 in 3. And I always say, that number is reliant on people who disclose, and people who are, the professionals. We're not disclosing. It takes, something that, extreme medical attention or some type of legal need for us to disclose, because I personally went decades and never disclosed. For a personal story, my father was actually the domestic violence investigator in my office when I was a prosecutor. He was qualified as an expert in domestic violence in court, and I still hid it from him as we were working in the same office. So that is how deep, back to what you were saying, the shame runs. I personally was so afraid of, what are people going to think? What are they going to say when I have the education. I know the signs. I know what to do. I have money. I have a good profession. I don't need, shelter. I've got my own house. What are they going to say when they know that this is what I'm experiencing? And honestly, a lot of people, they do say, well, why don't you leave? And it's because they don't understand how hard it is. People don't understand, the mental effects, the psychological effects, and the fear that people have. So you've got all of that on top of this shame and this, fear of what's going to happen to my reputation, especially when you're really succeeding and you're thriving. This is something that you do value. It's yours. You've worked for it. You don't want to shake up your whole life and lose your profession, lose the respect, lose all that you've built. And so that is something that just runs so deep. I know personally, and I've also spoken to so many survivors that have said the same thing.
I'm shocked at
Mhm,
that statistic you shared,
mhm.
that it's actually it seems like it's increasing or that the frequency of it is increasing, and I'm curious because we're in this kind of really strange moment right
Yeah.
now where, um, empathy is being reframed in certain narratives as a weakness, as a waste of time, as a character flaw. And from where you're at, do you see, going from 1 in 4 to 1 in 3, is it that more women are feeling empowered to disclose or saying, "You know what? Enough is enough?" Or is it, you think, just this, rise of insensitivity or turning away from empathy that isn't actually increasing the frequency
Yeah. Yeah.
happening in households?
I think it's increasing in frequency, but I do think it's also increasing in awareness for victims, because previously it was domestic violence requires physical violence. That's what people thought. And most people even took it to a level like, I need injury. I need, something really serious to think that this is abuse, but it's not. I mean, some of the worst abuse is the psychological and the mental abuse. And that now is becoming more talked about, and people are saying, yes, there's this deeper layer and level of abuse that's happening. So people are recognizing it. So that perhaps is the reason. So it doesn't mean it's happening more, but maybe people now are recognizing that. And I will say to that piece, though, so many people have said to me when I was going through this, I used to wish he would hit me. I wished, the abuse was physical. Cause one, maybe then I'd get out, cause there's always that idea of like, maybe if it was worse, I'd get out. But it was this, then maybe I could seek help. Then people might understand. Then it wouldn't be as shameful because people understand that. People don't understand, mental abuse and the psychological abuse. They just think that's not a big deal. And so many victims feel stuck if it's not physical. So I'm thinking that perhaps that's a reason. Without looking at the data, without looking at how this research was found, I can't really say, but I do know that's a new thing, or it's something that's been talked about more. That's been really good because it has allowed victims to say, oh, wait, that's me. That is me. I am in an abusive relationship. And that is a good thing. So hopefully, once they acknowledge it, they can take that step to get out.
That is such a salient point. The, psychological abuse, gaslighting, and I think that there's also this, really weird gray area, like you were saying, of, well, if it's not something that you can physically see, then it's not abuse. Do you think that there's also this, for example, you have children, correct?
Yes.
So sometimes I feel like people are almost more, regardless of whether she's, a high powered professional or whatnot. But it's like, well, if she's, got kids, I can kind of understand why she'd be reluctant to leave. So it doesn't matter if you don't have any children. If you're still in that situation, that the impact is the same,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, and the impact on the children is is huge. It really is. So staying for the children isn't usually the best thing, because there are just numerous studies, and if you talk to any therapist who has dealt with children, that have lived in a domestic violence household, it's a huge impact. So, people do say that, people do understand why people would stay because of the children, but honestly, that's not a good reason to stay. And I say that as someone who did stay for my children for long. So I don't mean that in a judgmental way that it's not a good reason. I just mean that that impact is still going to be there. We often think we're staying and protecting our children, but children know so much more than we think they know. They see so much more, they hear so much more. And that impact is there. And you're right, what that psychological abuse, it just really impacts every area of life. Victims end up going into the survival mode, and it's not just to survive the trauma. It becomes how they react, how they think in every area of life. So there's this constant anxiety, there's this fear of being abandoned, this fear of, being worthless, feeling worthless. All of these things start to infiltrate their entire life. And that's very hard, especially when you are a professional who has to come across as confident and strong and,
All
be
together.
protected, right? And then you're battling inside with all of these emotions. It is very, very difficult. It is very, very overwhelming and just exhausting, honestly.
Amanda, I would really love to hear in your words, what was the turning point for you where you finally said, enough, and I'm going to find a way to extricate myself
Yeah.
from the situation?
I've definitely been asked that a lot. And there are plenty of people who say this one night this happened. For me, it was one of those things that it was one night that I finally said, "You're never entering my home again," because it was my home. And I said, "This is it." But it was building. It was building, and it had built over so many years. And I was finally getting to the point where it was, you know what? I know I've learned how to live with abuse, and I'm scared of what it's going to look like outside of this because I don't know what my life's going to look like. But I said, I can't take this anymore. I'm willing to risk losing everything else if that means that maybe I can find some, safety within myself, feelings, a little bit of security. And it just started to resonate with me. I kind of started to feel that. I started to just feel like, why is it that I'm never happy? I'm always scared. I'm always walking on eggshells. And, so it just kind of was this buildup when I realized that that was my life. And I just said, I can't do this anymore. I'm willing to risk it all to get out and have my children not experience this, not see it. And then that's when it then came to this one night that I just said, no, I'm done. There was something major that happened that night. And I said, this is it. So it was really, it's not just a one night, it really is this buildup. And then it just happens. And I will say though, I at that time still did not admit that I was a victim of domestic violence. It was just I'm getting a divorce. And even that was hard to say. Because especially when you work in these workplaces where everyone has their spouses and people, talk about them and they go out and they celebrate holidays together. They have office parties. It's hard to even admit that you're getting divorced sometimes. So that was all that I would say is that I was getting divorced. It took years to admit that it was actually abuse.
You just reminded me of something I haven't thought about in years, and you've been brave to be vulnerable, in our conversation, so I'm gonna give it back. My mother was a victim of domestic violence in her first marriage. She was married to an alcoholic, and, she had my brother from
Mm.
that marriage, and similar to you and so many other women, there was one night that was finally, like, the breaking point, but when she would talk about it years later, it being that marriage,
Yeah. Yeah.
she would really emphasize that, "Yeah, he's an alcoholic and he would get mean," but she would never identify with the abuse part. It was just, "Well, he was an alcoholic." That was it. End of
I
story,
same,
you know?
same,
But
same.
I she would also say, some things that had occurred, and I'm thinking, "That's straight up domestic abuse." Different generation, but, it makes me think of when we were in our trauma-informed training, we did talk about survival mode and survival mindset, and one of the insidious things about it is you would we wouldn't know on the surface if somebody is in survival mode a lot of times, because they're so focused on being in that moment. They can't see forward, and they if I think it's like if you start to look back, it's like I'm going to start to ruminate and I'll lose myself in a spiral. So they just kind of constantly are always staying focused on what's right in front of them. How does that impact a woman who's trying to be high powered in her professional career, is expected to, be firing on all cylinders constantly? How can you speak to that experience?
The interesting thing is that there are some of the what we call trauma responses that actually can be beneficial in the professional world because we work in this place where you are supposed to be again put together at all times and strong and even emotionalist sometimes. It's almost vulnerability is looked at as a weakness in many professions. So some of these responses are things like we're really good at compartmentalizing. And that's often what we don't even think about that, but we can quickly experience the bad and move on. And it's now everything's fine because that's what we had to do. We're very hyper vigilant because we always have to look at, well, is the abuse escalating? And we can notice like the smallest little sign that it was escalating. So we're always, aware of everything that's going on. We're very proactive. We're always making sure that everything is done, very attention or detail oriented because again, we always have to watch for everything we said, everything we did. I mean, I had to watch words I used or places I went or TV shows I watched. So I was always on alert. So these types of things in the workforce can be very beneficial. Having someone who is, maybe good at compartmentalizing, good at moving on from something negative, someone who's very hyper vigilant, someone who's, focusing on detail. So that can be beneficial. But the thing that we have to remember is with all of those trauma responses also comes all the others. So with those feelings of this high alert, first off, that's exhausting. It is exhausting to constantly be looking at your surroundings and evaluating every single thing that's happening. But then there's that fear, there's that anxiety, there's that those feelings of, but am I ever going to be good enough? Is this ever going to be enough? And sometimes that's why, victims are always striving for perfection because we've always had to put on this happy face again because we're hiding it. So we have to look perfect. We have to look like everything's okay. But then in the reverse on the inside, we're thinking, but we're never going to be enough. So there's just this internal battle that is happening, but on the exterior, we might just look like this really great worker. So that's, how these trauma responses play out in particularly to someone who is high achieving and, successful person.
I mean, you speak so much truth. It really is that kind of two-faced coin where you can draw some positive aspects out of your trauma responses, that particularly are well suited for the professional environment, like you were describing. But the toll that it's taking internally, on your nervous system specifically, is significant.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And people don't see it. They see that quote unquote good things happening, but it's really coming at this, with this expense that is just not good. Because I can still, now that I've been through all of my healing and all of that, I still am good at things like compartmentalizing. I can very easily move on, but now it's in a healthy way. Now it's not in that extreme way, because that's the thing is it is extreme when you're in that survival mode. And again, to a colleague, you might not see it because you don't know what's going on internally. You're not sitting with them 24/7. So it just looks like, oh, they're just really good at this. But it's really internally, it's very damaging.
And you're right. Like it's so easy to kind of almost, I think, get not just accustomed, but almost like uh, addicted a little bit to like that feeling of being so locked in because you're so used to being on high alert that for different reasons, I was working through trauma and I loved almost that feeling before I understood why it was happening. But I loved that feeling of like, oh my gosh, I am in fuego. Like I've got, I'm pulling all the levers. And in retrospect, I'm like, yeah, because you were operating as if a bear was chasing you all the time.
That's right, and I always say that, it took me a long time to actually heal from this. I mean, that's the truth. It took finding the right therapist, which not easy because I will say this is my own little, soapbox for 1 second, if you can indulge me. There are so many therapists that do not understand that they are not equipped to handle long-term trauma like abuse. They went through school, they had trauma training, but they can probably be great therapists for certain things, maybe some anxiety, maybe some, I don't know, like things that aren't this deep rooted, you know, brain rewiring type of events like trauma. It takes someone who is actually, not just trauma informed, but trauma informed to the point of a therapist to really understand it. That's hard to find. And again, they don't know that they're not that. So I went through so many therapists. I went through four of them that all said that they were equipped to handle victims of abuse. And I will tell you, none of them were until I found the fifth one that actually was trauma informed and actually understood really, the brain workings of abuse and what it is and how deep it runs. That's finally when the healing really started. So it's really difficult, so when you're going through this, you do feel like you're just in this like fight mode at all times. And and this was the part now to get back to what you said. I just had to get on that soapbox for a minute because I always feel that way with therapists. They're wonderful, but you got to find the right one. Is that, I was at such a high, anxiety level. We'll just call it anxiety because I was in 24/7 fight mode, fight, flight, whatever you want to call it. I was trying to survive. That when I got out and, I no longer was trying to survive because I was, safe to a point. My anxiety, when I was going through with these other therapists, my anxiety was getting lower. And I thought that I was all better. I thought I was just, I'm just fine now. I don't have this anxiety anymore. But then I learned that it was because my anxiety level was like, a 50 on a scale of 1 to 10. And now when I went, I got out and I went through the wrong type of, therapy, my level of anxiety was like an 8, whereas a normal person, someone who had not been through trauma, was at like a 2. So I'm thinking I'm doing great at this, at this 8, but I'm not. I was so high on the scale, but I didn't even know it. I was still living in this just constant survival mode, but I had no clue because my number had come down, but I was still so far away from somebody who had not experienced trauma. And finally, when I did go through the right therapy and got to actually heal, I thought, oh my gosh, this is what it's like to live not in fear. Like it was a shock. Like I was having revelations every day, like, oh my gosh, this is what not having anxiety feels like. And it was an amazing feeling, but it was also shocking because I really thought, oh, as soon as I was out, I went through some basic therapy. I'm good. I'm healed. It takes a lot of, work but once you do it, it's a great thing. But yeah, going from this level of like just trying to survive is so intense that it's really almost it's hard to describe to someone who has not been through it.
That is such an incredible perspective on it in terms of like, yeah, you have high anxiety, but you don't really realize the extent to
Mhm.
which you're carrying all of this, emotional energy with you all the time. That when it starts to come down, you think, yeah, I'm rocking it. And really it's like, yo, you're still way in the outlier, kid.
Be way, way out there. And then, yes, it's amazing. But if people don't talk about that, if you don't have the right therapist, if it's not something that we just talk about, you're not going to know it because who knows it? Because, when you go from here to here, it does feel better. So, of course, you're going to think, oh, I'm better because you've never been way down here or it's been so long, because these relationships are usually long. So, I mean, I had been at this level up here for decades, so going lower felt great. I didn't know what down here was like. I didn't even think that was possible, especially when with all of the abuse, like I talked about, the things it does to you, it makes you feel worthless. It makes you feel like you're just never, going to get anything good or deserving anything good. So having this little lower is like, oh, I'm great.
What's one thing that you've like been able to flip
Mhm.
from that, because I would imagine that, it's forced open your window of tolerance so wide, right? That now you kind of have to adjust that as well, right?
Yeah.
What would you say has been the one thing in your experience
Mhm.
that you noticed the shift and it felt profound. It wasn't just like, "Oh, I think I'm moving in the right direction." It was like, "No, this is a true change that I can feel somatically."
It was the little moments in life. It wasn't the big things. It wasn't this, "Oh, I'm now this new person." It was tiny reactions to things. It was, when my partner would say something to me that before I would immediately get worried about, and the one time I didn't, it was like, "Oh, wait, I actually, like, handled that in a good way, because I don't have that anxiety anymore. That wasn't because of the healthy relationship. It was this leftover that I just never had healed. So it was just little moments over and over, while I was really going through this healing period, because it was very intense when I finally found the right therapist. It is intense to actually, you know, go deep and to grow and heal from this. And so I was having moments almost every day where I would feel it in my body because all of a sudden I'd react, but in a healthy way. And it would be, my gosh, that feels good. Like, this is what healthy feels like. So, I mean, there's just countless times that it was happening. Um, and it's a really great feeling.
Sound like glimmers.
Mm, yeah, yeah, and when you're going into this deep therapy is hard, it's like, you're in it and you're crying and you're in this deep moment where you're just, trying to get to the bottom, and then you have this moment of, like you said, this glimmer of, "It's working, it's feeling good, I'm experiencing the world differently," I am looking at me as being worthy and not just saying the words, "Oh, yes, I know that I deserve good things." No, it was actually believing it. And the first time I could actually believe that was it was pretty amazing, and that sounds probably silly to someone who's never been through domestic violence, but that truly is the mindset of someone who has been through it because you just get beaten down to a point and not even saying physically, I mean, it may be physically, but emotionally and mentally to a point where you just don't even know, what you are worth anymore.
And spiritually, I would imagine too.
Yeah. Yeah. Every level you could think of. Yeah.
Mm. So, I mean, I could talk to you about this for hours. You're just such a rich font of experience and information, and you're so authentic in your insights. But I'd like to, for our last few minutes together, kind of turn the lens to the future a little bit. And as a mom, I guess of I imagine your kids are like in the Gen Z cohort or around that,
They're all
maybe
teenagers.
alpha.
My oldest is 19. I think, yep.
Yeah. So you've got one Gen Z in the house. So there was this month, actually, Ipsos, I hope that's how you pronounce it, released the results of a survey that revealed about a third of Gen Z men now carry the belief that women should obey them in a marriage. And I am very interested in your perspective on this because as you're embarking on this initiative to raise awareness and to cultivate more support for women in the workplace, there's this rising generation of men that are um, adopting some troubling beliefs. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, that word carries so much weight, obey, and when you're talking about partners, because it's just historically been, the woman obeys the man. And, that's hasn't been looked at as something that's positive. But it often was accepted. But then we do have places where obeying someone is okay. You obey the law, you obey your parents, that is something that is acceptable and it's what we should do. So this word is just used in many different ways. And I personally don't like it because of that, because it's been used in the past as a woman must do this, but then it's used in ways, again, parents and laws where this is something that we should do and that's a good thing to do. So what for me it comes down to is what do they mean about that? What does that mean to them? And when I think about abuse and what domestic abuse is it's about power and control. So when a partner believes that their partner should obey them, and it's for a reason because they want to be in control and they want that power, they think that they should have that power. To me, that is abuse. But I say that at the same time where I do also think there are healthy ways in a relationship that people can obey each other. To me, that's what a healthy relationship should have, rules and boundaries, just like the law and just like parents have. So it is a way that you can, in a healthy relationship say, hey, these are things that I like, these are things that I don't like. And you both, mutually respect each other and love each other and obey those wishes. So to me, that's okay. But again, it's because that's not about power and control. That's like when a parent puts a rule in place or when, we have laws in place. It's about safety and it's out of, this love of trying to keep the peace. And when that's what the relationship is doing, this is just how we want to operate together. That's fine. But again, this word's turned into this more of, obey your spouse and it's only obey one, woman obeys the man. And when it's used in that way, I think that's where we are leading to abuse. And it's like that used to be the word that was used, and then we were getting away from it some. People weren't saying, I'm going to obey. Now it's coming back. So I don't like that word in the sense of a partnership. And it does feel like we're going to that way where it is for that power and control. And that's not what I believe it should be. And that is scary. That's very scary to think that a third of men are thinking that they should have that power and control over their spouse and not be, a partnership and that mutual respect.
I think they're starting to think that, marriage and relationships with women are hierarchical
Yeah.
and that it's more of a reporting structure with a top down communication when absolutely not. This is a partnership of two consenting adults with independent thoughts and needs and motivations that come together and have two-way communication to build something lasting. So I was telling you this earlier, but there's a creator I follow on YouTube who he is a therapist, but I love because he gives these really smart and sharp informed takes. And he was talking how the manosphere that's feeding a lot of this red pill content to impressionable young men has basically hijacked Brene Brown's framework for managing and healing shame and distorted it to use it as like a base of justification for why women are always the problem. And that's the trap, the system working against them. And they have every right to be angry. And yeah, I mean, it's just like, it was really fascinating. So, I mean, it does seem like this story of shame is getting distorted in a way that is driving a really toxic narrative.
Right. And that's my fear, when you use the word in that way, that obey for that power, that control, because they need it. The woman needs that control, that man to assert their power over them. That to me is abuse. Obeying each other's wishes and that partnership and talking about it, that's fine. I mean, we should respect and obey the boundaries that we put in a relationship. But that doesn't seem like where it's going right now. It seems like it's going in the direction of, it's for control purposes. And
Well,
that's scary.
it is, but I was going to say it kind of taking the glimmer from that.
Yeah.
I'm so glad that you're out there starting to really carry this work outward. You're gaining traction and momentum. It could not come at a better, more influential time. I guess to close us out
Mhm.
is if you could speak directly to someone who may be listening, a woman who is um, walking maybe in your former shoes. On the surface, it seems like she's got it all locked down and her life is beautiful. And she's dealing with a lot of shame and feelings of insecurity and inferiority and uncertainty all the time. She's living in survival mode. What is one thing that you would want to say to her
Mhm.
to help her really start to reorient and maybe find her way to you or someone
Yeah.
like you?
Yeah. The first thing is that, you're not alone. You are not alone in this because it is a time and a place where you feel like you are the only one that this is happening to because of the stigma, because of the shame, but you're not. There are so many before, I'm one of them, and so many currently going through it. Also, it's not your fault. Nothing you did at all warrants abuse. I always say, even if you did something wrong in a relationship, the right recourse is, maybe you get a divorce, maybe you separate. abuse is never the answer. So it is never your fault to be a victim of abuse. That happens to you. It's not something that, you are not a victim. It's happened to you. And it's happened to a lot of us. So that's really the first thing. And your feelings are valid. That's one of the things too, is we struggle with feeling like, well, maybe I'm taking it too personally, or maybe I'm perceiving it wrong, or maybe, we're always looking for reasons to make it seem like it's not that bad. But if you're feeling like it's bad, it probably is, and that's when I say, start talking about it if you can. Start looking for some resources. I mean, that's what I'm there for. My direct coaching really is for these individuals. We go through developing a safety plan. What do you want? How can we get you out safely, but with the least amount of disruption in the rest of your life? Because I recognize that you're working a lot of hours, you've got children, you've got social obligations, all of these things. So how can we get you out safely, get you out strategically, and set you up for the life that you want? So it's, that future planning as well. And we work together to make this happen, to make this plan happen. I work with other professionals, and I link up, clients with them. So there's a lot that goes into this, because this is a big deal. It really is a big deal. So, that's really the biggest thing, is just that you're not alone. And, I believe you, because if you've never heard that before, I'm here to say that
It happens to us too.
it does. Yep. Yeah.
Amanda, I can't thank you enough again for having this conversation with me for Women's History Month. I would love to have you back on, maybe at some point once everything is in motion. But for now, if someone listening or watching does want to reach out to you to learn more, how can they do that?
There's a lot of different ways. My website is theleeconsultants.com. So Lee is Lee. I'm on LinkedIn. Amanda Lee Costley is my full name on LinkedIn. So my website has my phone number, my email, Amanda at theleeconsultants.com, or my phone, text, call 410-375-2754. So any way you can reach me, I am here, to walk with you, or to do trainings, because I also want to get the word out. So that is, any type of leadership trainings, corporate trainings, organizations, just to really start talking about this. Let's break the silence, and let's all together start talking about this.
Amen to that. Thanks for watching. I'd invite you to check back every weekend to this YouTube channel for another episode of Unposted. Like, subscribe, share with a like minded learner, and be good to each other. Stay gold, and see you soon.